For the past 4 days, 16-year-old Zhang Mo had been strapped, almost naked, to a converted noodle rolling table. His captor had called the table the Smart Trojan. Lying on his back, his legs and arms bound to the legs of the table with belts, his head tilted back between two wooden joists, the boy had been immobilized by the man in the room with him. The man was pacing the room quietly, muttering to himself. Zhang Mo could hear the words, "Kill, don't kill," as if the man was struggling to decide what to do with him. Over his time strapped to the Smart Trojan, Zhang Mo had been choked to unconsciousness several times and had his stomach and neck pierced by the needle of a syringe. The terrified teenager met the man, who was now deciding whether or not to end his life, in an internet cafe. The two struck up a conversation about the game they were both playing, the older man giving the teenager advice on how to play the game. The man then claimed he had run out of money and needed to go home to get some more. He asked Zhang Mo to accompany him to his house. The teenager agreed. After having lunch together, they went to the man's house, where Zhang Mo was shown the man's invention, the Smart Trojan. The man told the boy it was a kind of intelligence test, and after demonstrating how to use it, asked Zhang Mo to give it a try. Curious, the boy agreed. It was then he was tied down and stripped of his clothes. He was then choked with hemp cloth. He passed out but came round again, still alive. The boy pleaded with the man not to end his life. He told the man if he did, he would be seriously punished. The man simply replied, "You are not the first, I've already killed 20 people." With the man now agonizing over what to do with him, Zhang Mo sensed there was hope he could get out of his prison alive. He told the man, "Brother, you are old and alone. I promise I won't report you. I'll take care of you for the rest of your life after you retire." The man, with tears in his eyes, untied Zhang Mo, returned his clothes and let the boy go. Too scared to return home to his grandparents, who were taking care of him, Zhang Mo went to a classmate's home and spent the night there. The next day he returned home and told his grandparents about the horrifying experience he had endured the past few days. The grandparents of Zhang Mo informed the boy's father, who was working in a different city. His father returned to the village immediately and reported the incident to the police. Zhang Mo took them to where he had been tortured for 4 days. Huang Yong made no attempt to flee after freeing Zhang Mo from what he considered his own invention, the Smart Trojan. After letting the boy leave his home alive, he had followed Zhang Mo to make sure the teenager didn't report him to the police. Seeing his, now former captive, go to a house rather than a police station, Huang Yong was satisfied that the boy was going to keep his promise. He returned to his home. There he wrote a note to Zhang Mo which suggested he was going to take his own life, rather than taking the lives of others. The police came to his home and arrested him before he got the opportunity to do so. They would begin a massive search of the home, looking for evidence of the remains of the victims Huang Yong told Zhang Mo about. They didn't have to look too hard. They started to find human bones almost as soon as they started digging up the property. Huang Yong was charged with the intentional homicide of 17 people, the majority of them teenage boys. However, as news of the arrest and the reasons for it spread through word of mouth, it received an angry response from the people living in the area. For some time, teenage boys had been going missing, and many families had reported the disappearances to the police. These reports were often being ignored or not taken seriously by the local police force. Now parents and grandparents of the missing teenage boys wanted to know if their children were among the remains found, and why Huang Yong was allowed to get away with his crimes for so long. Born November 18, 1974 in China's central province of Henan, Huang Yong grew up in Zengzhuang Village, Pingyu County in the city of Zhumadian. Despite it being considered the birthplace of the majority Han people, Henan people have often faced discrimination from those from other provinces around the country. Henan is often referred to as the child trafficker or liars province. This is partly due to Henan once being among the poorest provinces in China. Huang Yong was the youngest of 3 brothers. While sons were often desired by parents at that time, with 2 boys already, his parents were hoping he would be a daughter. He was left to be raised by his grandparents, while his mother and father brought up his older brothers. Feeling rejected by his own parents, Huang Yong grew up feeling isolated and struggled to make friendships with other children. He dropped out of education after middle school, and was said to be an extremely shy and quiet child. Like many children in a similar position as him, he would escape into fantasy worlds. He immersed himself into martial arts novels and became obsessed with movies. Having a TV in a rural Chinese village at this time was an extreme luxury, so people would have to go to what could be very generously described as cinemas. These cinemas were often just a TV set and seating for the audience. He was particularly fond of crime movies, and he would later say that the Hong Kong crime thriller 浪漫杀手自由人, or Killer's Romance, was one that influenced him greatly. He idolized the bad guys in the movies and would fantasize about being like them. With little education to speak of, Huang Yong worked a number of low-paying menial jobs, but he would rarely keep them for long, preferring to spend his time watching movies. When in his 20s, he was left alone in his family home as his parents moved away to work on a pig farm. Now with the space all to himself, he began to think about indulging in his fantasy. However, not being physically imposing or strong, he was concerned that any potential victims would be able to fight him off. It was then when he came up with the idea for, as he christened it, the Smart Trojan. While he gave it an impressive-sounding name and many articles written about the case referred to it as a machine, the reality is somewhat different. His family had an old noodle rolling table that had seen better days. He simply removed a section from the top of the table, exposing the joists underneath. He discovered, after trying it for himself, that, while someone placing their neck between the joists was fairly simple, it was a little more difficult to get out of that position. Once he tied the person's arms, and sometimes legs, to the table. With their neck between the joists, they would be immobilized. He chose the name the Smart Trojan for a reason. He believed people weren't stupid and wouldn't just get on the table. Giving it an interesting sounding name would stoke people's curiosity, so they would be more likely to want to try it out. His future victims would be told different things in order to further stir their interest. The only known survivor of the Smart Trojan, Zhang Mo, was told it was a form of intelligence test. Others were told it was to test their reaction time or strength. Some were simply told it was a game. He gave his creation a new coat of paint, and once he was satisfied with his alterations, he was keen to put it to the test. He made the decision not to look for female targets as he felt that it would make him, in his words, appear less heroic. So he only targeted young males. In September of 2001, Huang Yong would find the first person to try the Smart Trojan. Huang Yong prowled internet cafes, video halls and arcades looking for a suitable guinea pig for the Smart Trojan. He eventually targeted a middle school student, Lu Mao. After striking up a conversation with the young boy, Huang Yong told him he had money to give him to help with the boy's tuition fees. Once back at his home, he introduced the boy to the Smart Trojan, telling him it was a device to test reaction time. Lu Mo got on and placed his neck between the joists. Huang Yong then tied the boy's arms to the legs of the table and placed a rope around the boy's neck. Once life had left Lu Mo, Huang Yong felt panic. He hadn't thought about how he would dispose of the body. He first thought about taking it outside and simply dumping it in the surrounding countryside. However, he felt that it would be too easily found. So he made the decision to dismember Wang Mo and bury the remains on his property. He dug a pit next to his toilet. Homes in rural China would rarely have plumbing for their toilets. It would usually be a hole in the ground that the residents would clean out themselves. He thought the smell from the toilet would help disguise any odor the buried body parts emitted. He burned the boy's clothes and simply covered up any bloodstains with dirt. Once he had dealt with the disposal, he felt a mix of joy and fear of being discovered. It would be almost a year until the next confirmed victim of the Smart Trojan. Huang Yong had become interested in video games and spent a lot of time in arcades, playing the games frequently. In the summer of 2002, he met a young person referred to as Wu Mo. The two struck up a conversation about the game. Huang Yong had become quite good at the game due to the amount of time he spent playing it, and showed Wu Mo some tricks. Huang Yong told Wu Mo that he could get him some construction work that paid fairly well. Wu Mo, hoping to earn some cash, went with Huang Yong and was introduced to the Smart Trojan. He told Wu Mo that it was a test designed by the head of the construction company, and that Wu Mo would need to do it before he could start work. Wu Mo got on the device, and after strapping him down, Huang Yong placed hemp cloth around his neck and pulled it tight. Once it was done, Huang Yong dismembered the body and decided to bury the remains in the same area as Wang Mo. After, Huang Yong said he felt like a true killer, but needed more practice to fine-tune his technique. For the next few months he was too busy to look for a new victim as he had to take care of the family farm. He would get the chance to strike again in January of 2003. Apart from movies and video games, Huang Yong enjoyed painting. He has filled walls of his home with different artworks he had produced. This is what he would use to convince his next victim to come to his home. Huang Yong met high school student Wang Mo in an arcade. The two got talking and they found they both had an interest in art. Huang Yong asked if the boy would like to see his own personal work at his home. Once again he would convince the teenager to try out the Smart Trojan, ending in the death of Wang Mo. Huang Yong dug up a new area near his toilet to bury the dismembered remains. The death of Wang Mo would also present a macabre benefit to Huang Yong. The high school student was carrying a not insignificant amount of cash for someone like Huang Yong. For whatever reason, Liu Mo had 520 RMB on him when he went to the home of Huang Yong. While this only amounts to around $70 today, at that time in rural Henan, that would have seemed like a small fortune. He now thought he would be able to make money while fulfilling his dark dream of being a killer. As a result, the Smart Trojan was about to be used much more frequently. While there had been significant gaps between his previous victims, it would be only the following month he struck again. Shortly after the Spring Festival celebration, Huang Yong found the next willing teen to try out the Smart Trojan. In a video hall he got talking to the young man, Wei Mo. Huang Yong said he could help Wei Mo out by lending him some money. The Smart Trojan would be the test Wei Mo needed to pass to get the loan. The young man got on the device and his life was ended with a strip of hemp cloth around his throat. Huang Yong didn't wait around long before striking again. And this time he would have two victims at the same time. In February 2003, Huang Yong got talking to two middle school students in another video game arcade. He convinced the two boys, Chen Mo and Han Mo, to go back to his home with the promise of snacks and alcohol. The two students were happy to go along. Huang Yong plied the young teens with beer and the strong Chinese rice wine baijiu. The boys passed out drunk. This time he didn't use the Smart Trojan. He placed the boys in his bed and choked them one at a time. He first tightened the cloth around the throat of Chen Mo, before doing the same to Han Mo, who, in his drunken state, had not been woken by the struggles of his friend. After finishing them off, Huang Yong discovered that neither boy had much money on them, so he came up with another idea to make the work worthwhile. Prior to disposing of the remains, he kept some of the hands. He wrote a threatening letter to the manager of a cell phone shop he had a personal issue with, demanding 500 RMB. After spending the day in an internet cafe with the hands in a bag, he waited until the store closed and left the hands and note outside the front door. The next day, as police were investigating the gruesome demand for money, Huang Yong returned to the scene to watch. He was confident he was safe as he had worn gloves when he wrote the letter, leaving no fingerprints. When the investigation came to nothing, Huang Yong felt emboldened, and that the police would never catch him. With him now feeling somewhat untouchable, the next month saw Huang Yong take his crimes into overdrive. In the March of 2003, he claimed the lives of 6 young people aged between 16 and 20. The first was a 20-year-old man he met in an arcade, Zhang Mo. He once again convinced the person to go home with him, saying he needed to get more money to continue playing. The Smart Trojan claimed yet another victim, whose remains were once again buried on the property. Only 10 days later he went on the hunt again. He found 18-year-old Zhao Mo in a video hall. The young man had already dropped out of education and was looking for work. Huang Yong offered to help Zhao Mo, on the condition he was able to pass the Smart Trojan test. They went to the home of Huang Yong together and Zhao Mo went the way of the previous victims of the device. His next victims came only 4 days later. Huang Yong met 18-year-old student Liu Mo in an internet cafe. He invited the boy back to his place to drink. Liu Mo asked if a friend of his could come along too. Huang Yong happily agreed. As with the last time he had 2 victims, he got Liu Mo and 18-year-old Huo Mo drunk. And like last time he had 2 unsuspecting drunk victims, he didn't use the Smart Trojan. He choked them in his bed as they tried to sleep the alcohol off. Huang Yong waited only 2 days before finding another person to face the Smart Trojan. Next was another high school student, Han Mo. Huang Yong met him at an internet cafe and managed to get the boy to come to his home on the promise of a job offer. He told the boy he would successfully get the job if he could pass the Smart Trojan test. 2 days later at an internet cafe, 17-year-old Zhao Mo agreed to go to the home of Huang Yong, hoping to be given a game card with money on it, so he could continue playing online games. Of course, the card was conditional on the boy passing the Smart Trojan test. The final victim of the month was 16-year-old Yang Mo. Again, an internet cafe was the meeting place. Huang Yong this time offered to lend the boy some money which he had back home. This time he told the boy that if he passed the Smart Trojan test, only then would he get the money. At the same time that Huang Yong was quickly filling the grounds of his property with the remains of his victims, there was growing anger coming from families in the local area. This anger was being directed towards the police and schools. It had been noticed that young people were going missing and parents had reported the disappearances to the police. The reports were either being ignored or dismissed entirely. The attitude seemed to be that these kids were going missing when they were supposed to be in school. Therefore, they were bad kids who were probably just off hanging out with friends, had run away or had gone to find work in other areas, and they would turn up eventually. Schools hadn't noted or informed the parents of the victims being absent from school, even though a number of the victims had been placed into boarding schools. Huang Yong was free to continue doing what he was doing, without any hint of the police looking for someone in connection with the missing people. April 2003 saw 2 more people falling victim to the Smart Trojan. However, their remains would be found much later than other victims of Huang Yong. 17-year-old Zhai Mo had left education and was looking for work. Huang Yong offered to lend him some money, as long as the teen could pass the special test back at his home. Next, Huang Yong claimed the life of his eldest victim. Zhao Mo was 22 years old at the time he fell victim to the Smart Trojan. Huang Yong convinced the young man that he could help find him some work after the two met in an arcade. Huang Yong would earn 110 RMB, around $15 US, after selling the bicycle Zhao Mo rode to his house. His spree would slow down significantly over the next few months. He would claim a victim in the months of July, September, and October. In July, he ended the life of 19-year-old Chen Mo, who he met in an internet cafe. Then in September, he added the remains of 18-year-old Feng Mo to the grounds of his courtyard. He had gone to the home of Huang Yong in the hope of receiving a game card for the arcade. The final confirmed victim of Huang Yong and the Smart Trojan was 17-year-old Qin Mo. Huang Yong made passing the Smart Trojan a condition for lending the boy money. Once again, Huang Yong would earn himself some money by selling the boy's bicycle after. Huang Yong would later say that it was around this time that he had grown tired of killing. He felt he had now mastered his technique and no longer felt the same excitement he did at the start of his reign of terror. Despite this, in the following month of November, he would take one more boy back to his home to face the Smart Trojan. This would be Zhang Mo, the boy he let go. During his time held captive by Huang Yong, Zhang Mo would try to escape a number of times. The first was that Huang Yong was trying to strangle him. Huang Yong hadn't tied the boy's feet, so Zhang Mo was able to get up and try and run out of the house with the Smart Trojan on his back. Another time was after Huang Yong prepared some instant noodles for the boy to eat, but the doors to the home were all locked. Huang Yong swung from treating the boy as an actual guest in his home to torturing and choking him. When the boy was tied down, Huang Yong would beat him or stick a syringe in him and try to draw blood. This was in between the times he choked Zhang Mo. At one point, Huang Yong took Zhang Mo outside and dug up a body on the property just to prove to the 16-year-old that he had taken people's lives before and that Zhang Mo would be joining him. Zhang Mo would frequently talk to Huang Yong in an effort to convince his captor to release him. Finally, on the 4th day, promising to take care of Huang Yong in his old age, earned Zhang Mo his freedom. Although later Huang Yong would claim that he intended to let Zhang Mo survive, so the boy could report him to the police and he would be arrested. He said that he wanted to stop his crimes but wasn't brave enough to go to a police station himself. After his escape from death, Zhang Mo would give people some insight into what the Smart Trojan test was. It had 3 levels. First, Huang Yong told him to simply lie on his back on the former noodle rolling table and place his head between the joists. The challenge was to do it without the table falling over or the person falling off. The second was to do the same but now with the person's arms and legs tied to the table. The third was to then have a hood placed over the participant's head as they counted to 1,000. This was the test that claimed the lives of multiple young men. 1 month after his arrest, on the 9th of December 2003, Huang Yong faced trial. The court required a heavy police presence, as an angry crowd numbering in the thousands turned out to get a glimpse of the serial killer. Huang Yong appeared to revel in his notoriety as he was guided into the building by a police guard. He smirked and seemed happy to see the angry crowd gathered to watch him. This only further stoked the crowd's fury. Inside the courtroom, he spoke quietly when giving his answers. There were a number of times the trial was interrupted by families of the dead shouting at him to speak up. Huang Yong never apologized to the victims' families, and when asked if he would like to make a final statement, he simply shook his head to say no. Pressed by the judge to say something, he eventually said letting Zhang Mo survive was his reward to society. He was sentenced to death. Weeks after his trial on December 26, 2003, Huang Yong was executed by a gunshot to the head. There were, however, many people still unsatisfied. They believed the number of people who died at the hands of Huang Yong was much higher. Many families who had reported their children as missing wanted to know if they also fell victim to the Smart Trojan. This case is eerily similar to the case of Gong Runbo, which I have made a previous video about. Gong Runbo was allowed to get away with the deaths of 6 children in less than a year, in large part thanks to a disinterested police response to reports of the children going missing. 4 months after the execution of Huang Yong, frustrated and angry families took a drastic step to find answers. They decided to go to the home of Huang Yong and dig up the grounds themselves, searching for the remains of any more victims. 2 more bodies would emerge that had apparently been missed by the police in previous searches of the property. These were, supposedly, the remains of the victims killed in April 2003, however there would be controversy over their identification. When the results of DNA comparisons returned, the newly found victims were identified as belonging to teens whose remains had already been found. Confused and angry parents were quick to fight back at what looked like an attempt at a cover-up. It was later said that the misidentifications were just errors. In the aftermath of the case, high-ranking members of the local government, Public Security Bureau, Education Bureau, and leaders of the schools were removed from their positions and received criminal punishments. Although full information on this is scarce. While Huang Yong himself said he had killed 17, these were only the victims he was charged for. One family member of the victims claims he was told, off the record, that there are at least 23 people who died on the Smart Trojan. In all likelihood, the true number will never be known. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please consider giving it a like, subscribing to the channel, and leaving a comment. And hope to see you again for the next dark tale from the Middle Kingdom.